And we're back in the car on a Sunday like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Sunday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, we got a lot going on. And for those who tune into my movie episodes, I apologize. There have been a lot of baseball episodes, and there probably will continue to be a lot of baseball episodes because even growing up, I love movies, but I love baseball. Baseball's my sport. Dyed-in-the-wool, diehard, lifelong Yankee fan. I was born into it. My dear old dad, Alan Philip Cohen, who was a huge movie fan, as I've talked about, he was the biggest Yankee fan I knew also. And so I kind of grew up bleeding Yankee blue, probably from before I was born. So today, of course, is an important game for the Yankees. They're at game 2 of the division series. They got out of the kind of the kiddie table version of the postseason, the wild card round, and they're in the main draw, but they dropped the first game yesterday. They really got blasted. But I always say, I'd rather lose a game 10-1, where you pretty much trailed all the way, than blow a late lead or some variation on that. So you go out, you try to win the game today, and then you go back home for 2. But you know what? If you lose, it's still not over, because in 2017, the Yankees lost the first game to Cleveland, tough game, and then they had a 7-1 lead in game 2, and there was a disputed play where Joltin' Joe Girardi, a manager I didn't like, loved him as a player, inexplicably didn't challenge something that probably would have been overturned, and it more or less cost the Yankees the game. So season over, Girardi's got to go, Cashman's got to go, Steinbrenner sell a team, the usual bullshit, people lighting up the phone lines, this is not a championship caliber team, this is disgusting. And then the Yanks won the last 3. They ended up winning the series, and Cleveland had barely lost. They won something like 17 out of 18 down the stretch. You don't know with baseball, because what? It's baseball, Susan. It's baseball, Susan. But I'm not really here today to prognosticate or, poke holes at certain things or take shots at certain players at current era and all of that. 30 years ago, in a game that started 30 years ago yesterday on October 4th, 1995, and ended at 1:23 in the morning today, October 5th, I would argue that is the single greatest game ever played at the original iteration of Yankee Stadium. You could say it's the greatest game ever played at any version of Yankee Stadium. It was game 2 of the 1995 American League Division Series between the Yankees and the Seattle Mariners, and obviously I don't need to go into the mechanics of how that happened. I've talked about it on, in at least 3 different episodes from different angles. But it was the Yankees' first playoff appearance in 14 years. And they won the first game. The first game was a tight game. The Yankees were winning 4-2 in the 7th, and David Cone, who seemed to be in control. Cone was just about still in his prime in 95. If he wasn't, he was 95%. He was still, an all-star caliber pitcher. He had, fastball 92 to 94, the splitter, the big looping curve. He had that sidearm slider that I could still hear Ralph Kiner and Rusty Staub calling it the Laredo. They used to call it the Laredo for whatever reason, because it kind of had a lariat type of a move on it. But the Yankees ended up winning game 1 late, because Ken Griffey Jr. hit a game-tying 2-run homer, and you start doom and gloom, we're going to lose. Here we have this big opportunity with Randy Johnson, best pitcher in baseball at the time, not being able to go until game 3 because he went in the playoff game. And the Yankees scored 4 runs in the bottom of the 7th, and then held off a kind of late Seattle rally to win the first game 8-6. So you come out the second game, you're all fired up. And the Yanks had a young pitcher in his rookie year who went on to have a pretty good career in Andy Pettitte. And it shows you just how much of an impression a very young, 23 at the time, Andy Pettitte made on the Yankees, because of the fact that he was even allowed to start not a playoff game, the fact that he was the number 2 starter already. It showed you just how much faith the Yankees had in him. And also that Jack McDowell maybe had a little bit in the way of some physical issues, and you liked to have lefties going at Yankee Stadium because of the way the ballpark laid out. It's a ballpark, then as now, that you'd rather have a lefty, all things being equal, because the power alley, the sort of easy porch in right field, and even then, center field and left center field, you got to hit the ball. You got to hit the hell out of the ball to get it out of the ballpark. It's a pitcher's park if you're a left-handed pitcher. So the Yankees went with Pettit in Game 2. And I remember the excitement was through the roof because we won the first game, and you start imagining we had a theoretical pitching advantage in Game 2. The Mariners started a guy they had gotten at the trade deadline. Imagine a situation where you're like 11 games out of first, and you're adding pieces at the trade deadline because of something that didn't exist the previous year, the wild card. The Yankees did it when they traded for David Cone in a season which would have been a lost season with no wild card, and the Mariners gambled and went for it, trading for Andy Benes, who was still pretty good. He wasn't as good as David Cone at any time, but Andy Benes was starting in Game 2. And Pettit had this pickoff move, which there are many people to this day that will say that Andy Pettit's basic pickoff move was a balk. That it was a balk, and the umpires at a certain point just decided we're not going to call it. We're just not going to call it. It should be a balk, but we're going to let him. We like Andy Pettit. We're going to let him, or something like that. So Andy Pettit didn't pitch that well in Game 2. But he picked off 2 runners. And they weren't even stealing. He just had a move. It seemed as if he was going to home plate, and he was able to do this kind of a step where he simply stepped toward first. But if you were on first, it appeared that he was stepping to home plate, which would mean it's a balk. So the Yankees took the lead, and then the Mariners got to Andy Pettit, and they went in front. I think they went in front 3-2. Yeah, they went in front 3-2. And the Yanks came up in the bottom of the 6th, but you didn't feel like the game was over. There are times in pitchers' duels, or if a team has just an absolute lockdown kind of a bullpen, where you feel as if a 1-run deficit is a big deal, and you're in huge trouble here. But Benes, he didn't seem to have his best stuff. He was kind of fortunate that the Yanks had only gotten the 2 runs off of him. And so the Yanks came up in the bottom of the 6th, and you just had the feeling the crowd was into it. You just had the feeling that something amazing was going to happen. And I apologize in advance because I'm going to get emotional here. I can't help it. The only New York Yankee through history where I get emotional is Mattingly. He's the only one, because Mattingly is one of the Gen X guys. Most Gen Xers were either kids or pre-teens, teenagers when Mattingly hit his peak, which was 1984. And he's the only real, what you could call a tragic figure, within normal parameters of sport, not life, but a tragic figure in Yankee history. Never won a World Series, never got to a World Series, despite being, easily certainly in his prime, he was one of the 10 best players in the history of the franchise. Mattingly came up with the Yanks down 3-2. And it was as if the 56,000 strong in attendance willed him to hit the ball out of the ballpark. And he already had a big Game 1. He knocked in a couple of runs. And even though he was at the end of his career, we didn't realize how close to the end. You'll think that maybe you're going to have a long postseason and maybe he'll come back the next year. Downey was only 34. He wasn't that old. But as baseball players go, he was done. He was shot. But towards the end of the 1995 season, because Mattingly, if you look at footage of him in the mid-'80s, he used to go into this crouch, and he came out of the crouch like a cobra, like a coiled spring, and he would almost explode out of this crouch, and that's how he generated power. And when he hurt his back in 87, he really couldn't do it to the same extent. He couldn't get low anymore because his back was always hurting. With all of the stretching and all of the treatments, he would come in early every day to get the chiropractor would work on him, and the massage therapist, and they had a back stretching machine to try to help him, and he did hyperextensions with no weight, whatever it was. He did all of the conditioning that he needed to, but his back still hurt. Towards the end of the 95 season, he really hadn't been hitting that well. He had his moments in the first half, but he just couldn't consistently turn on the baseball and hit with power. If you're going to be a first baseman, whether it's now, whether it's then, you've got to be able to hit the ball out of the ballpark. I don't care how many gold gloves you won. In the case of Mattingly, he won 9, and he could have won more than 9. Towards the end of the season, he started working a little bit with Paul O'Neill. Paul O'Neill was a much taller man than Don Mattingly. O'Neill, you could argue, was a more physically robust. Like, Paul O'Neill had genetics that you would expect more from a football player than a baseball player. He was just a guy who had a genuinely impressive build, whether or not he worked out. There were just some guys that look like professional athletes. Paul O'Neill was one of those guys. And so Paul O'Neill had this leg kick. And I don't know if he actually worked with Mattingly or whether Mattingly just said, hey, Paulie, you think that leg kick might work for me? And O'Neill said, maybe ask a question of the hitting coach. Is it a height thing? Will it work? Mattingly started to toy with this leg kick. And at the very end of the season, he started hitting the ball with more authority. And in the postseason, he ended up hitting well over 400 in this playoff series. And on the home run that he's about to hit to tie the score, you see him raise his front leg and turn on the baseball. And he hit the ball with the kind of force that he had not really had since the 1980s. It doesn't mean he never hit the ball hard, but he didn't have the torque, and the ball did not come off his bat with the same exit velocity, which wasn't really a thing in the 80s. But there's a video on YouTube if you want to see what I'm talking about. Mattingly only had one kind of memorable walk-off home run, and it happened in 1985, the year that he won the MVP award. It was a game early in the season against the Minnesota Twins where the Yankees trailed 8-0, and Mattingly came up with 2 on and 2 out against a former Yankee, Ron Davis, whose son you might have heard of if you're a Mets fan. It was Ike Davis, was his son. And Mattingly hit a 400-and-something foot home run deep into the right field seats to win the game with 2 on and 2 out. And the exit velo of that ball was probably 110 miles an hour. He just smashed it. But Mattingly came up against Andy Benes in the bottom of the 6th with the Yankees down a run, and the drumbeat of the crowd, the excitement in the crowd, there was a sense, because Ruben Sierra, who was still in his prime, was following Don. There was just a sense that something wonderful, if you're a Yankee fan, it was in the air. You could feel it. And my father and my dad was not like an optimistic Yankee fan, but he felt like, Jared, we're going to win this game. I feel a rally coming on. I mean, it's so stupid, but, my dad, 52, 53 at the time, he's like, I'm really feeling like we're going to score here. Let's go. And the announcer, he might be retired now, I'm not sure, Gary Thorne, he worked for the Orioles as well, and he was a hockey announcer too, but Gary Thorne, just for baseball, had one of the best voices ever, and has had one of the best voices ever. And Gary Thorne, it's almost like the universe had him doing this game because of what was about to happen. Mattingly comes up, and the fans are cheering like they know something's happening. Gary Thorne, before Andy Benes throws his second pitch, goes, here's Mattingly. The fans want a dinger out of him. And Benes throws, and Don gets into it, and watching it live, I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. Because it was too perfect. This is not supposed to happen like this. This once on his way to the Hall of Fame, best left-handed hitter, he and George Brett, 1 and 1A. Prime Mattingly was better than Tony Gwynn. He was better than Kirby Puckett. Because Donnie, not only did he not strike out, he could hit the ball out of the ballpark. His prime season, his slash line was like 29, 115. Home runs and RBIs I'm talking about. And he won the batting title hitting 343. He was a 320, 330 hitter who was going to hit the ball out of the ballpark 20 to 35 times a year. He was a dominant offensive player. Not Aaron Judge. But he was a notch below just from the offensive perspective. The fact that he didn't really strike out, 35 homers, 38 strikeouts kind of thing. So Mattingly got into it. And Gary Thorne's call of this one by Mattingly, hang on to the roof. And there was a thing at the old ballpark, and even Bob Brenly, who ended up beating the Yankees in the 2001 World Series, Bob Brenly was doing the 1996 World Series with a very young at the time Joe Buck and Tim McCarver. And when the Yankees rallied in Game 6, because there really wasn't much to cheer about in the first 2 games of that World Series, but when the Yankees rallied, I'm talking, of course, a year after this game, but Bob Brenly said The whole stadium is shaking when the Yankees rallied in the fourth inning. I can't believe it. The whole stadium is shaking. Our booth is shaking. When Gary Thorne said, "Hang on to the roof," he meant the ovation here is going to be so intense, it's going to feel like the old ballpark's coming down. Even though it was not really the old ballpark, it had been retrofitted and remodeled 20 years prior. When Donnie hit that home run, you look at the crowd watching, if you watch the replay, again on YouTube, I posted a short if you find the short, but there are people who are simply cheering, but if you look closely at the fans, there are people in attendance who are crying, just as there are people who cried after the third out of the 1996 World Series. We take our baseball very seriously. And Mattingly's home run got the fans so crazed, they actually had to stop the game because they were doing stuff you're not supposed to do. They were throwing shit on the field in a humorous vein. In the 1998 World Series, when Tino Martinez hit the grand slam, speaking of Seattle, when he hit the grand slam off of Mark Langston, who had been with Seattle until about 97, the fans were throwing beer on the field. They were going fucking crazy. So the fans went berserk on Don Mattingly's game-tying home run, and they took the Mariners off the field, and it was a few minutes break, and I don't blame a former great Yankee who won 2 World Series with the Yanks, Lou Piniella, for pulling his team off the field. I'm not taking any cracks at Lou. You got to protect your guys. Somebody could have got hurt. They were yelling at Griffey and all that, Buhner. But when we came back to the field, the next batter was Ruben Sierra, and Ruben was that kind of guy. He was a great pressure player. He had a lot of big hits when he came back to the Yanks in the 2003-2004 era. He had some big home runs. He had a home run against the Twins, a 3-runner, to help us win the division series that year. And Ruben hit another skyscraping moonshot of a home run to put the Yanks in front, 3-2. And he, was it 3-2? No, I think he put him in front 4-3. I'm sorry. And he tugged his jersey, and he hot dogged it around the bases, and even Gary Thorne said, "Put the mustard on her, baby." Game, Yanks lead 4-3 or whatever the call was for that, but he screamed, "Put the mustard on her, baby," because he was a hot dog. Ruben was a character. He was a character. Tremendous, tremendous pressure player. So I got to be honest, at that point, it felt like the Yanks were going to win. I said, I think we've got this game. Now we're going to win. But Andy needed to go a little further into the game. And the Mariners got 2 runs. The Mariners pushed it to 4-3. No. I'm getting this mixed up. They pushed it to 5-4. The home runs made the Yankees. The Yanks were winning 2-0. Then it was 3-2. And then the Yankees took a 4-3 lead, is what it was. So after Sierra's homer, it was 4-3 Yankees. But Seattle got 2 runs in the top of the 7th. And, they probably should have had Pettit out of the game, but what are you going to do? Buck Showalter, the Yankee manager at the time, he didn't know quite what he had with Mariano. This was not like 96, where the formula would have been, you got a lead going into the 7th. If Mariano can go, try to get 2 innings, and then Wetland for the last 3 outs, if you get there. So the Mariners took the lead, and they had a 1-run lead. And they brought in their closer in the 7th with a 1-run lead. Piniella desperate to win the game, Norm Charlton. And Norm Charlton was a phenomenal pitcher. He didn't have the career he should have because he had a lot of injuries. But when Charlton came out of the bullpen, now my dad said we're screwed. We needed to not get behind. I don't think we're gonna put any points on the board against this guy. I think we're fucked. And Charlton threw upper 90s with a wipeout slider and a curve. And you felt like now we're in trouble because he wasn't wild. And Paul O'Neill got into one, and I think there was 1 out or 2 outs and no one on, and O'Neill hit a bomb. He hit a bomb, almost a close your eyes and just barrel it up. And O'Neill tied the game at 4. It had to be at 4. He tied the game at 4. If I get the runs mixed up, I know that the game was tied at 4 at this point. So the teams then battled, and Charlton went 3 total, and they went back and forth. And the Yanks used a lot of relievers who did a good job. And they ended up, Wetland gave up, John Wetland, who was the Yankees closer that year, again, didn't really pitch that well. But Mariano came in the 13th inning. But what makes this game, in addition to the lead changes that I mentioned, is that in the 12th inning, Griffey Jr. hit another home run off of John Wetland. And so now you're in a situation where 3 outs, and that's that. You know, you go back to Seattle, and it's a game apiece, and all of this incredible stuff with Mattingly, with the back-to-back home runs, and the emotion is going to go by the boards. It's not going to matter. And you had to face Randy Johnson in Game 3, probably going to lose the series in 4. The Yanks came up in the 12th inning, and with 2 on and 2 out against Tim Belcher, who was a starter, so he actually stayed in for the duration, Ruben Sierra hit a frozen rope that looked like it was going to be a 3-run homer. Whether or not it was a home run was irrelevant if both runs scored. The Yanks were only down a run. Sierra hit a ball off the left field wall. And I don't know, was it Rich Amaral? I'm not sure who the left fielder was. But it hit the wall. The guy didn't have a play. It hit the wall and it caromed like into the body of the outfielder. And I think Bernie Williams was on first, and Bernie could really run. And so, of course, the runner on second scores easily. But the left fielder got the ball to future Yankee Luis Sojo. He won, I think, 2 World Series with the Yankees. He got the ball to Sojo, and Sojo made a perfect relay. And they threw Bernie out at home plate. And that was devastating because we were supposed to win the game, and my dad, that was as angry as I've ever seen him. And we were in a second-floor apartment. We hadn't gotten to the house in Huntington yet. He was furious. It was already at close to midnight, if not past midnight at this point. He was really pissed off. He kept shouting, "That was supposed to win the game. There's no way they make that relay. This can't be right." He sounded almost like me. But they threw Bernie out, and the game continued. And this is when I say this is one of the greatest games ever in the history of the major leagues, because of the history of Yankee Stadium, because the Yankees' first playoff appearance, because it's a postseason game, and because you had both teams score in an extra inning, and then the game continued for another hour. So with the score at 5-5, the Yankees brought in a rookie reliever named Mariano Rivera. And Mariano froze that incredible Seattle offense for 3 innings. And when you talk about, in this particular game, the Hall of Famers on display. For the Mariners, you had Randy Johnson, you had Ken Griffey Jr., and you had Edgar Martinez. That's 3 Hall of Famers. Now, on the Yankees side, the only Hall of Famer that was playing, that was on the field that night, was Mariano Rivera. Derek Jeter was in the dugout, and he was on the 40-man roster, but he was not on the active roster for that series. The Yankees wanted him to sit in the dugout because they were being hopeful. We're on the come, we're on the rise here, and we want this kid who was the top organizational prospect. We want him to get a taste of October baseball. So Jeter was in the dugout, but he was not. He didn't play. And the Yanks didn't have Tim Raines yet because they had him the next year. So the Yanks had more active Hall of Famers in '96 than they had in '95. But Mariano, I think, only gave up 1 hit, and he got Griffey out. He just was tremendous. He had a lot of strikeouts, and it felt like the only way you were going to win this game was with a home run. So it started to rain in the top of the 15th, and Mariano, I think the last out he recorded was like a dribbler to the infield where he covered first, I think. I know he got Griffey on a line out to center that looked like Ken Griffey Jr. Hit the ball harder than he actually did. But the Yanks came up in the 15th, and there was a man out, and Belcher was still out there. Tim Belcher was a good pitcher. He was with the '88 Dodgers. He won a World Series. He was a really good pitcher. Big fastball, big burly kind of guy, tough, good competitor. And the Yanks had a man on and 1 out. And Jim Leyritz, who ended up hitting an even a bigger home run in Game 4 of the 1996 World Series. And next year, that's one of the biggest home runs in baseball history because it tilted the fortunes that the Yanks were going to lose that World Series, and Leyritz hit a 3-runner in the 8th inning of Game 4 with the Yanks down 2-1 to tie the score. The Yanks ended up winning it. But in this spot, it's raining. It's 1:20 in the morning. You know, the joke is my dad had to get up for work the next day. There were people at the ballpark. You look at the stands, it doesn't look like anyone's left. Whoever had work the next day, fuck it. I'll get 2 hours of sleep. You can't leave a playoff game. You've got to stay to the bitter end, even in the rain. So remember, as Leyritz comes up to the plate, there's a shot of the lights in right field, the right field upper deck near the foul pole. And you could see the rain is coming down. It's the kind of rain where if they hadn't started the game, they're not going to start the game until it slows, because it's starting to really, it was a mist and now it's like a heavy mist. It's almost a steady drizzle. And on, I think, a 2-1 pitch or a 1-1 pitch, Jim Leyritz, who had a lot of power to the opposite field, I think he hit his biggest home run year. He had 17 homers one year. But Leyritz hit, didn't look like a home run off the bat. It looked like a high fly to right field. But Belcher threw very hard. And even with the rain, there may have been a little bit of a wind from behind. And when the ball went up in the air, Gary Thorne on the call, he thought it was a home run off the bat, because he said to right field, maybe, it could be, back to the wall, goodbye, home run. And it's one of the last times that any appreciable numbers of fans stormed the field, a la Chris Chambliss in 1976. There weren't a ton of fans like with that, where there were thousands of people. But a lot of fans stormed the field, and Leyritz went around the bases like he was floating on air, and the Yankees went berserk. And they won that game 7-5. And all they had to do was win one in Seattle. Seattle had the 3 home games. And the Yanks went to Seattle. They got beat up in game 3. They had a big lead. I think they had a 5-1 or 4-0 lead in game 4. Wetland got just hammered in relief. And then game 5, they had the lead in extra innings. They pushed a run across against Randy Johnson, and the Mariners scored 2. And not only was that the end of the game, that was the end of the season. The Yankees lost that great series in 5, and that was the end for Don Mattingly. So Don Mattingly's last game in pinstripes as an active player, the game came to a conclusion at 1:23 a.m. on October 4th, 1995. But I will stand on business, and I will say and argue with anyone that Game 2 of the Yankees-Mariners American League Division Series is one of the greatest. It's probably the best game ever played at Yankee Stadium, but it is one of the best games in baseball history. A 5-hour game, playoff game, with multiple lead changes in regulation, and then both teams scoring in the 12th. The Yankees getting the winning run, incredibly, thrown out at home, and then a walk-off homer at 1:23 with a still full ballpark at that ungodly hour. And Donald Arthur Mattingly pulled off his player's uniform for the last time, and who knew that it was going to be that? But let's go Yankees today. Let's even the series, get it to 1 game apiece, and come back home. But you know what? Like I said, if they lose, the series isn't over, because it's baseball, Susan. This has been episode 620 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Sunday afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace out and go Yankees.